There we go. Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode number 1 of House Arrest with Chris and Tamara. Chris, are you up? I see you there now.
Welcome, everyone. I know lots of anticipation tonight, so this is going to be awesome.
Yeah, thanks so much for showing up last week. We had a great time. It was a really fun roundtable with Chris and everyone. So as stated, tonight we have Brian Peckford joining us, as well as the lovely Trish Woods. Brian has not showed up yet, which is fine. So I am going to bring on Trish, and we will just chat until he shows up. All right. Trish Wood is an award-winning Canadian investigative journalist, renowned for her fearless reporting on science, medicine, and public policy. With a distinguished career at the CBC, she served as a senior reporter and host of The Fifth Estate for over a decade. Now an independent voice, Wood hosts the popular podcast Trish Wood is Critical, where she dissects media failures, true crime, wrongful convictions, and societal issues with her signature empathetic yet unflinching style. And so without further ado, let's bring on Miss Trish Woods.
Hi, guys.
Miss Trish Woods.
Good evening, Trish.
How are you?
How are you?
You guys look pretty happy for a couple of folks under house arrest, I must say. What's happening?
We've been busy.
We're managing, okay.
Nothing ever gets you guys down. It's amazing. You're just
what probably goes on behind the scenes when we're not on social media, probably a different story. Our spouses can probably attest to, but you know what? We put a good smile on. One of these episodes is going to have to be spouses. You know that, right?
Yeah, no,
yes,
for sure.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I had a bad day today. I'd planned a show with, Carl Harrison and Sean Ricard, the two brave guys who are doing the travel mandate vaccine case, which is actually going forward. It's a great, great story. And these are not guys you want to be embarrassed in front of, because I respect them a lot, right? And the whole system crashed. It was insane. And we fooled around for about 45 minutes, but couldn't get it. So I called it down. There is no show this week. I think only 4 no podcasts in about 5 years. One of them was because I had COVID. We took it down because I had COVID, but yeah. Wow. So this is working out. Look at you. You're all kind of.
It's great. I mean, this is going to be a bit of a learning curve for sure. I mean, it's not pretty by any means. I'm coming at you live tonight from my grandson's old baby room in the basement. I've been relegated to the basement of the house now. So,
but you know what, you guys were always tech savvy, right? I mean, our first interview, you were in Thunder Bay or someplace like that. And you were doing a Zoom on a phone, which I didn't even know you could do. You guys had all that, the Facebook Live and everything. It was amazing. And probably the convoy wouldn't have been what it was without that, right? That was a big part of it.
Well, Chris was really the TikTok pro. So he was, but I mean, I was saying one of the reasons why it was so meaningful to have you come on as our first guest host, because I don't know, well, your followers would for sure know, Trish, but my first communication with you was back in the early pandemic days, and you had done a show on Dr. Bridal. And I remember I just found your show, and I was like, thank heavens, there's somebody out here asking these questions and talking about the other side. I couldn't find anyone that was doing that. And I'd emailed you because the Dr. Francis Christian situation had just happened. Yeah. So I emailed your show, and you emailed me back, and you said he's on Friday.
Oh, did I? And, good. I'm glad I was nice to you.
You were nice to me. And then, of course, Trish was right with Chris and I reporting on the convoy regularly. She started a special add-on to her show called Coffee with the Convoy, where we'd stop and do an interview, on our way at certain stops and stuff. And it was such a great time.
I know. I just feel like crying. It's hard to talk. Why do we do this? Why do I always feel like crying when we talk about? I don't know. I had an insight the other day that it wasn't a protest; it was a rescue. Right? Protest is the wrong word. It was a rescue. And, I'm working on the film, and we've interviewed a lot of people who were very moved by what happened. And I think that's what the feeling was. And I wish, this may be unfair to the judge, but I wish she'd understood that better, Justice Perkins McVeigh. That element of the convoy never really made it into the courtroom, sadly. And I think it would have maybe, I don't know if it would have changed her mind, but I don't think I'm not criticizing her, but I don't think she fully understood what it meant to the country. I don't think she did.
Mhm.
Trish, is somebody that was sitting in the courtroom that day when we were sentenced, did you feel like the judge built us up just pre-sentence, where she basically said you did everything right, you were peaceful in nature, you're peaceful, you promoted peace, you worked with law enforcement?
Yeah.
And oh, by the way, here's your 12 months.
Well, it was weird. I actually was, as she was doing it, I thought, I'm going to go back and do a word search. If I can get this document of hers, of her sentencing, and find out how many times she used the word peaceful, because it felt like she said it a million times. It sounded like you were going to get an award, and not a sentence of something. So I don't quite know what that was about, except maybe she was signaling that she felt the law didn't allow her to not do that. But that also made no sense to me either. It was a very weird thing. But I do remember also you were patting a dog, which was great, right? That greyhound. I love that part of it, that there was a rescue dog in there with you guys.
And that rescue dog was there for quite a few hours, and during the duration of our trial too. It was kind of, there's an animal. It's just, he just kind of came and sat beside me all the time, so I was in the perfect position.
Yeah, but you asked me, why did you ask me that question about what the judge said? I'm wondering what you're getting at.
Well, it's something that I've kind of sat on the last, I guess it's been 2 weeks now since we've received our sentence. So it's something that I kind of thought about the last while here. Like she built us up and basically said how good we did and how we tried to do everything as good as possible. But then I don't know if people want to say that it was a complete win because we didn't go to jail, but like, our lives are different for the next year and a half because of this now. So I don't think it was a complete win, although it was nice not to go to jail, but we're just adapting to this new life right now. So
yeah, I don't know how else she could have done it. That's my view. I mean, I probably shouldn't say this because it doesn't sound very objective, but I was really proud of the protest and the way you guys handled it. Like you said from day one, it's going to be peaceful. Tamara is on the Facebook lives every 2 minutes. Peaceful. There's video of you telling people to be, I mean, it's remarkable. And Tom too, so I don't get it. I still, like you guys, am flabbergasted by how it's turned out, and it just feels unfair. And maybe she followed the law. I'm not smart enough to know the answer to that, but it doesn't feel right or correct to me.
Well, and I think we touched on this last week too. Hi, Danny and Tom, by the way. And I don't say this because I feel sorry for myself, but I mean, I feel like I got the harshest sentence out of everyone, because she seemed to go through these great lengths to sort of differentiate Chris and myself. Like, he was much more sarcastic and visible on social media. Anyways, and she basically gave us the same sentence. We received the same sentence. I just got credit because I did time in a remand. So,
well, during the verdict, I thought she was quite hard on Chris, right? So she kind of changed her tune around the sentencing, didn't she? Because remember, the thing that struck me about the verdict, I think it was that day, was that there was a video of you, I think it's a TikTok, where you F-bomb a lot. And I know you, and you don't F-bomb particularly in front of women. Like, I don't think I've ever heard you use that word. You're a pretty polite guy, but you're with truckers, so you're F-bombing. And she said every F. Do you remember that? And I thought, wow, like, why is she doing this? This really feels like it's making Chris look bad and like someone he's not really like that guy, right? It seemed kind of prejudicial and unnecessary, but I guess she was maybe just going by the transcript.
And that's one of the things that I probably bettered about myself. And during Convoy, my old social media personality, my audience was truckers, and that was basically what it was. And then during Convoy, I was able to look back and think that there was probably a better way to reuse some words and limit your language and grow a little bit. So that's why I say I think I probably grew the most out of anyone during Convoy, it's a benefit.
Yeah.
I'm just going to mute myself and give Brian a call and just see if he's having problems with the link. So you guys feel free to talk amongst yourselves.
Okay. Hi,
How's
Danny.
it going there, Tom and Danny?
I'm good on my side, but I'm going to let Danny talk because Danny's connection was terrible last week from his car. So I'm going to defer to Danny tonight.
Well, I'm not in a pickup truck waiting for the call to go pick up a load of grain. But I hope my connection is better tonight. Thank you for having me, Trish. Thank you for being here.
Happy to be.
Not much new with me. Still just wrapping up harvest, trying to get everything squared away. Crop is in the bin, and still trying to reinvent our life here in northern Alberta. So that's where we ended up moving back to where Piper and I both grew up after we left the Ottawa Valley. We've been living here now for like officially since I'd say September 2023.
Yeah.
After we left the Ottawa Valley, we took some time to go travel abroad and then finally decided to settle on moving back home to where we both grew up around the Grand Prairie area.
It's beautiful country. Every time I go up there with a truck, I am in awe. I love that drive north of Whitecourt on the 4-lane up there, and it's beautiful country.
Yeah.
It's kind of remote up there too. And I wondered when I heard about where you live, this might sound like a weird question, but is it a bit of a rejection of everything since what happened at the convoy? Like, are you kind of retreating a bit from civilization?
Well, we definitely wanted to live rural. We didn't want to have neighbors anymore after what happened during COVID. Although we were already looking for acreages even when we lived out near Ottawa.
Yeah.
So we had made offers on places like leading up to COVID happening, but we definitely wanted to distance ourselves. Well, just give ourselves more privacy after COVID, because we definitely had neighbors that did not like our position on things and totally went from being very close and personal with us, and I would say like quite friendly, to just like complete didn't want anything to do with us, would like walk right past me and when I'd be in the yard doing yard work and like not like pretend like I didn't even exist, like not even look at me anymore. So and that was like kind of symptomatic of the whole community that we were living in, aside from like 4 families that remained friends with us. So after the convoy, that was the way that the convoy was taken down and all the uncertainty with like, okay, what's going to happen to us now, was when my wife and I were like, we need to get out of the Ottawa area. And so we started right away, getting our house ready to put on the market. Took some time because we're also kind of, we're doing some research on different things we had learned during the convoy, trying to figure out what was real, what wasn't. And then also, kind of, I would say, battling like a form of depression for like a good like 3 months, until finally I kind of just like snapped myself awake and was like, okay, you have made zero progress on getting your family where they need to be. It's time to get moving. And so that was when we really started to work on getting the house ready for the market and making those arrangements.
What was the depression about, Danny?
Well, I think the feeling of betrayal. You know people for the better part of a decade.
Yeah.
You feel like they're your brotherhood, and then all of a sudden it's like, it's seemingly almost overnight you're one of the team to you're the enemy. And I saw police do things during COVID and during the convoy that I never ever imagined I would see in Canada. And part of it, like, I'll admit, I was worried. I was worried they were going to come for us. And so I had a before the convoy came to Ottawa, like kind of in my darkest time during December 2021, right around the time I resigned, I was, I had a 2-stage plan. Like, if things get really bad, if they start like rounding people up to like put us in quarantine COVID camps, or coming door to door with public health and police saying you will take this shot or else. I had a plan to, like, number one, evacuate to Alberta, to where our families are and where things were like not quite as crazy. And then stage 2 was charter plane to Mexico, because I knew other people that had done that. And so I had connections for that reason. So I think just coming to terms with the fact that like everything happened, it seemed like announcement of mandates, snap election, mandates being enforced, all of that like happened in a very much of a like almost like a blur state where it felt like I was constantly like I didn't have time to like really sit there and think things through. I felt like I was under constantly under like immense pressure to make decisions on the fly. And then all of a sudden, you know, after the convoy was taken down, it kind of felt like the gravity of what had just occurred over the last few months kind of sunk in.
Yeah.
And so went from behaving like almost like riding like a little bit of an adrenaline high of like, okay, I got to do this next. I have to do this next. It was just like, whoa, like the dump happened. And then the depression came with that.
Wow. That's brutal.
Mm. Okay, so sorry to jump in here. Brian was expecting a Zoom call, not a StreamYard call. So I don't know how to get him on here because he's not set up for a StreamYard.
Interesting.
So if
It should be a link that
anyone's
you
got,
can accept, right?
yeah, well, it should just be that. But he said it tried to make him sign in with Google and all this stuff that he didn't have it all.
That's
But,
weird. This happened before with what browser is he using? That makes a difference.
Okay, I'll call him
He
back.
was on Safari the last time we had a problem with his link, and way back like, in 2022.
Okay.
Yeah. So see if that.
I will call him back. Unfortunately, we've already started the stream, so we can't really get off and set it all up again. And I'm not really set up for Zoom, so I'm not sure how we're going to solve this problem. But I will call him back. This is the great thing about not being a techie and a rookie. Could we just do audio with Brian? I was wondering if we could. Maybe I could just get him on the phone. Would that be?
I'm not sure.
Would that work?
I know every time somebody sends me a link for StreamYard, all I usually have to do is click the link and it just allows me to come in. So I don't know if
I think it's his browser.
Maybe a pop-up.
Okay.
Too.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll try him again. And if we can't get him on StreamYard, then I'll just have to hold my phone up to the microphone. We're going to get super techie here at House Arrest tonight, ladies and gentlemen.
Okay, Tom.
Okay,
so maybe you could talk now about what Danny just said, which is being quite depressed after the convoy. I'm just wondering, we don't want to be Debbie Downer, but I do want to know what you were thinking.
Yeah, and you know what? I spent some time talking about Danny. I don't know when it was, but you know, Danny and I come at it from a slightly different perspective because of the careers, the backgrounds that we have, right? Than maybe some of the others. That doesn't mean that it's unique or special. It just means that it's a different perspective because we're coming from professions where, you know, your job is to protect the public. You know, there's you know, by and large, the public, and I don't mean this to be insulting, but I mean, there are the sheep, there's the wolves, and there's the sheepdogs. And, you know, when Danny and I are in professions that involve the sheepdogs, defending the sheep from the wolves, and then all of a sudden the other sheepdogs either do nothing or they outright turn on you, which is more to Danny's case because I've been out of the Army for 10 years. And but what was difficult for me is of all I was very concerned about the backlash that I would get from my former colleagues in the military. I didn't get really a backlash. I just got completely ignored. Like there's the Toronto Military Family Resource Center, and years ago I was one of on the board of directors for the TMFRC. You know, and I did a lot of good things. I was involved heavily in that. But during the convoy, I found out that they saw my name, and I wasn't on the board anymore, but they saw my name at the convoy and basically put a notice saying this guy does not ever walk through the front door of this building again.
Wow.
Right? And this is where my daughter's daycare was. You know, and so a lot of my former colleagues, I've never heard from any of them. except for one great guy. He was my commanding officer when I was posted to London, Ontario. I'm still in contact with him now, and he was very supportive during the convoy. But I've had since then, I've gotten to know David Redman. I've gotten to know Lieutenant General Masoner. So there are people. Anyway, I want to make sure I give room for Brian.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we are going to do the best that we can. I do have Brian on. Brian, can you hear everybody? Can you say hello?
Yes, hearing you quite clearly.
Can you hear him?
Yeah.
Hello?
Good to hear your voice, Brian.
Yeah.
Yes, they can hear you.
Okay.
Okay, great. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to introduce to you the one and only Mr. Brian Peckford. Brian Peckford served as the third Premier of Newfoundland from March 1979 until March 1989. A member of the Progressive Conservative Party, he was first elected as the member of the House of Assembly for Green Bay following the 1972 general election, which was the year I was born, by the way, and was elected as PC leader in 1979. Mr. Peckford is the last living signatory of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and we are thrilled to have him as our special guest for episode 1 of House Arrest. So welcome, Brian. Sorry it's not perfect, but it's what we got.
Thank you. No problem. We can make it work, I'm sure.
Great. Okay, well, we've got Chris, of course, Tom Marazzo, Danny Beaufort, and Trish Woods here on the screen with us right now.
Okay.
And as I said, I've asked Trish Woods to be our guest host, and we went over a little bit of stuff that we wanted to talk about. So I will let you guys go. Go ahead.
Okay.
Multiple questions from people. Brian, there's one thing I want to ask you, but if you don't mind, we'll talk about the charter in a minute. But there is this great story, and maybe you and Tamara and Chris can even have an exchange about this. On February 14th, 2022, when the Emergencies Act was invoked, you were sitting, as I understand it, in the Lord Elgin Hotel. I've heard this from a bunch of people who saw it from different perspectives, but given that you're here with Chris and Tamara and Danny and Tom, and that was such a big moment, can you maybe just explain what that was like for you and maybe interact with them a little bit about what collectively that was like to be part of this historic but awful moment? And of course, the irony of you being this signatory to this document.
Yeah, well, it was quite unusual and startling. Although being there at the time and talking to Keith Wilson and some of the other people who were with at the time, there was something that came to us through other means, indicating that it was likely that the federal government was going to invoke the Emergencies Act, and we were completely shocked at the time. But knowing the various things that had happened up to then, our shock suddenly turned to, well, what do you expect? And the first thing came to my mind was, in introducing, in invoking the Emergencies Act, they were also subject to the Charter. And the Charter, Section 1 says you must demonstrably justify that what you're doing is constitutional, follows the Charter. And of course, they did not do that. They just went ahead and invoked it without demonstrating that they had justified doing this under the Charter. That's part of the introduction to the Emergencies Act, was that they were subject to the Charter. So, it was completely wrong, and from the start. So, the view is completely unconstitutional. The establishment of Rouleau as the commissioner and all the rest of them. By the way, after we got over that shock and I came back home and the commission of inquiry got established, the lawyers did submit my name to be one of the witnesses during the inquiry, and that was turned down, as it has been in other court cases around the country. So the courts don't want to hear from one of the people that was there and helped create the Constitution Act 1982, which included the Charter, at all. That they completely made sure and dismissed anything that I had to say.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Shocking.
Yeah, really shocking. You became a voice of sanity early on in COVID too, which was very comforting for me to see somebody of your stature speaking out so kind of rationally about what was wrong with what they were doing. But and maybe this isn't a fair question, Brian, but I'll ask you anyway. Why do you think they invoked it? We all know it wasn't necessary, that there were other ways this thing was going to end, and they were actually, from my understanding, well on the way to ending it with a deal, perhaps with the city. Why do you think they went ahead and did it the way they did it too, with the violence and all the terrible things?
Remember, it wasn't necessary. It was unconstitutional for them to do it. From my point of view, I wouldn't use necessary. Being involved in the Constitution like I was, it was unconstitutional. So right from day one. By the way, when we got that news, that was when Tamara and I, with Keith Wilson and the others, set up the press conference, which we had to abort halfway through or 1/3 the way through, in which we announced at that press conference that we had heard that in the next couple of hours they were going to invoke the Emergencies Act. So we got ahead of the game on them and actually publicly announced that what they were going to do, and I'm sure that upset them. To get on to your question, I think they did it because to be kind to them, they overreacted and had a very limited scope of sources from which to make decisions. I think this is one of the problems, is that they overreacted to the situation and allowed people who were who were going to be inconvenienced by what was going on to take center stage rather than listen to others, no doubt, who thought that this was a little bit overreaction. So, to be kind to them, others would say that it was all arranged and part of the great grand scheme. And, that's another theory as to why they did it. But like I say, to be kind to them, I would say they did it because they overreacted and did not seek out more sources to talk about whether, in fact, they could do this or not. And I doubt whether they asked anybody in the Department of Justice, is this legitimate for us to do this? Because of Section 1 and demonstrably justify, can we really do this? So I doubt whether they really sought out and had, I think it was more of emotion than overreaction to the situation rather than, soberly and rationally consider it.
Right. I'm told that you said something like, "Oh my God." Do you recall?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, I did. Yes, absolutely. Because at the, you always think the best of people, even when you know that they've already done things which you don't like. And in my case, they weren't even going to consider my court case on the travel ban. So, I had every reason to be far more, what shall I say, unsavory or in my reaction than even just, oh my God, because of what had already transpired up to then. But, trying to be fair and rational, my best reason, without getting into it being all planned from the beginning, is that they totally overreacted. And the other thing is, at that point, the Prime Minister and the committees and so on that were involved in agreeing to go ahead with this invocation of the Emergencies Act could have called Keith Wilson or me or anybody else who was there, or the people who organized that whole truckers protest, and sought a meeting as Tamara and the group had sought a meeting with them earlier. So they didn't reach out to the other side before they went ahead and did this.
No, and if you remember too, I remember at the very beginning of the pandemic, they were talking. Justin Trudeau was talking about invoking the EA so that they would have unchecked powers to manage and mitigate the pandemic.
Yes, exactly. So it was very much on their minds, and they didn't need too much persuasion, obviously, to move ahead with it, because if you had that in your head as it relates to managing the pandemic, which was, again, an overreaction by all the governments of Canada, led by the federal government, unfortunately, and led by the Public Health Officer of Canada, then it was only a small step for them because they have it in their minds anyway. But one would think there must be somebody there who knew that the truckers' convoy people and the leaders had sought a meeting with the federal government, and it had been turned down. Well, it was only for them to reactivate that interest by the truckers and the leadership for them to have somebody in the Prime Minister's office or the Minister of Justice office or somewhere to contact the truckers' convoy and seek a meeting or seek even a conference call to go through this and hear the other side before they went ahead and invoked it. So, they didn't make any steps to really cover themselves, but just sought advice from their own people who they already knew was on their side.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, we were working with the city, and I think that scared Justin Trudeau. Remember the day I met you, Brian, and your amazing wife, Carol. We were moving vehicles from the residential areas. We finally reached out, or the city reached out to us and actually wanted to work together. And that gave us a little bit of spirit, knowing that we could actually do something. And it seemed like Justin Trudeau did that out of spite because he knew things were looking better for us, I guess.
Yes, I agree. I mean, if in fact, that's true. I mean, through getting through to the city, which we were able to do, right? When I contacted my friend, who was a friend of the mayor, and we were able to establish that linkage between you guys and the city. You would think that, given that rather than overreact and act in spite, would at least to cover themselves, even if they were still spiteful. But in order to rationally cover themselves from a legal and constitutional point of view, you think they would have done that consultation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which therefore brings into sharp focus this whole business of them having their minds made up almost from the start. That once the truckers arrived in Ottawa and a few people complained, if you live in a capital city, it's like living in the Arctic. It's quite likely it's going to go below zero. You shouldn't complain about the cold. If you live in a capital city, especially a national capital city, it's natural that there are going to be protests, and there's going to be days when there's not going to be the same kind of atmosphere as it is in a normal city that's not a capital. So I find very little patience with those people who talk about being disrupted, because that's natural. That's going to happen in capital cities where civil disobedience is going to occur from time to time, and that's all legitimate and constitutional.
Mm-hmm.
Chris and I were talking a little bit earlier about during the judge kind of gearing up for her verdict. I think it was 72 pages, or it was long anyway. And most of the things that she said about Chris and Tamara in the courtroom that day were positive. I mean, it actually, as I said earlier, it sounded like they were going to get an award instead of a verdict. But I'm wondering now, sort of in looking back at that, and how peaceful the protest actually was, right? So it's not just the invocation of the EA, but it's the invocation of the EA against people who weren't really doing anything bad. They were making noise and kind of bothering people.
Exactly.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
So,
exactly. And that is a bit of a pattern, as you write to the judge, and how she sort of spoke kindly of Chris and Tamara.
yeah,
Sort of a pattern, because just recently here in British Columbia, the court that was hearing another case dealing with the public health officer in BC, through most of the hearings that the judge had at the Supreme Court of British Columbia, they seemed to be very kind to the people who were making the application for a hearing. And yet, when the decision came down, it was quite viciously negative to the same applicant. So I don't know if it's something they're trying to appease their conscience as they go through these decisions or what. But it's really troubling when early on in the pandemic, the court in Manitoba, Supreme Court there, came right out and said, the judge came right out and said in his decision that on the business of it not being constitutional, what was happening with the mandates and the lockdowns, and the applicants had presented a whole bunch of independent science, medical science, which has stood the test of time, and the judge clearly said that he was just going to believe what the government said.
Yes, I remember that.
That's not the role of a judge at all. The role of a judge is to assess the evidence that's presented before them. But all this judge was willing to do was look at what the government said and not the other data presented in his court. So it's very disturbing to see these things. And then, of course, in my own case, the travel mandate, how the Federal Court of Appeal and the Supreme Court of Canada ruled that they would not even hear the case. And here was 6 million Canadians being affected because these are the people who did not get vaccinated. So therefore, it was a very pressing public policy interest. There was a public interest here that the three courts completely denied. And the other thing that they denied, which is very much a part of British common law, and in practice, was the right to know. A citizen's right to know that when an action was taken against them, which was going to be negative, they had a right to know why. They had the right to know, to be heard, and for them to be considered. And a right to know why the government did this, especially in the case of the travel mandate, because we were able to show in court, the lawyers, Keith Wilson and his colleagues were able to show that the transport department, who was responsible for bringing in the mandate, had no medical evidence supporting their case, supporting the mandate. And that was publicly admitted in the court. And yet they went ahead and did it. So here was a court, here was a Transport Canada and the government of Canada making a decision to negatively impact the rights of Canadians when they had no evidence on which to validate their rejection and their introduction of the mandate. So, and this stands today as a testament to the incompetence of the court system.
Yeah. Well, that was one of the things that really got me going. It might even have been that decision, Brian, where I heard about it and I left my office and went into my living room where my husband was sitting, and I said, I can't do this anymore. Like, when the courts stopped acting in a neutral way on behalf of the citizenry during COVID, I said, what pillar of democracy is left? We had nothing, right? And that's sort of when the convoy appeared on the horizon. Everybody was so happy because there was nothing left for people to do. And I remember the judge, Justice Perkins-Smith, they actually said, they had other ways they could have protested this. No, we didn't. There was nothing else. This was the only thing we had. Everything was failing. So I remember that very clearly.
Your reaction at that time, because I heard you say that before, is quite valid. And anybody looking at the situation, impartially at all, knew that what the judge was saying. You had other ways of doing it, and so on, and to move ahead with the things that they did. Just left so many Canadians. What's happened now today as a result of all that, and as a result of our reactions being validated so many ways, is that I really believe now that many Canadians have decided that the only thing that they can do now, many of them can't leave the country or keep protesting. They have jobs, they have families, they're trying to stay alive, they're trying to do the things that normal people do, is that they have just blocked it out. They have blocked it out because when I talk to people every day now, as opposed to a couple of years ago, is that they just block it out and they just want to move on because they have too much personal investment in their kids and in their house and in their place to continue to pursue that and be part of any ongoing objection that I would make, for example.
But I wonder also if it isn't a little bit of learned helplessness, right? I mean, people were so happy about the convoy, and then we got sort of 3 weeks of happiness, and then it was crushed, right? And I
Yes.
think that has left a residue across the country. I think people say, well, if we can't protest peacefully like they did, what great examples they were of how to actually do it. I mean, it was like Gandhi, right? They were so peaceful.
Yes.
And yet we can't even have that. So what do we have like that? I think that's why people now who were really heavily invested in that emotionally and sociologically are so depressed right now, Brian, because what do we do now? How do we what levers are available to us if not protest or the courts, right?
Exactly, and this is very dominant today because I can personalize it. No media and mainstream media in Canada will carry anything I say. No university will allow me to speak there. The last university where a professor was going to do it, he realized that just with all of the people on his faculty with him were opposed to his views of taking a look at what Brian Peckford or the Tamara or what other people, Brian Bridle or anybody else or Dr. Peterson had to say. They just didn't want to do it, and so that professor realized that his job might be at stake, and he spoke to his wife about it, and I pointed that out to him early on. I said I'd be really glad to sit down with your class and go through the charter, go through how it was formed, what happened during the truckers' convoy, where we are now, and the dangers to our democracy. And at the end of the day, he decided that he really couldn't do it.
That's shocking.
It is shocking. I mean, here's a man, and let's listen to the experience and you know who he is, where he comes from, and not public. He should be being paraded around every public school to talk to elementary and high school children. He should be speaking at universities. I mean, it's insanity to me, Brian, that isn't happening.
And it's right here in Alberta, I had a group of students, some of whom lived on Vancouver Island, who went to this university and were doing law, and they approached their professor for me to come and speak to them because they had listened to some of the things I had been saying and wanted what I had to say to be part of the discussion that they were having on the Constitution in their classes. And the professor earlier agreed, but then when he checked with his superiors, he sort of evaded the students until they had to, sort of accost him one day and say, where are we? Because we have to contact Mr. Peckford, and he's agreed to come at any time at his expense and so on, and we need to give him a time frame. And the professor said, I'm sorry, that's off.
Brian, I don't want to interrupt, but I see Carol has logged on here. Are you able to speak through that? I've let her into the studio here on StreamYard. Are you able to?
No, Carol is there.
Oh, okay. Well, I see her. She popped up on StreamYard anyways.
Okay.
So, but I don't have any video.
Okay, she's listening.
Okay, that's fine then. No problem. She can listen. Welcome, Carol. Okay, sorry, Trish. Go ahead.
Oh no, I did want to say one thing. Well, many things to you, and then I'll hand it over so I'm not hogging too much here. But I just an irony that I'm with you tonight because I was supposed to interview Sean Rickard and Carl Harrison and Gina Watil today about their lawsuit, and so I had it was kind of a privilege to do the research for that show. It didn't work out. I had a tech problem, but I got to do the research, which meant watching the Jordan Peterson show on that with Rupa Subramanya. It was a great show. but also to read some of their legal documents. And the Charter of Rights and Freedoms is all through that. So they list the violations as 6, 7, 12, and 15, and then they describe them. This is a living document. I think Chava BC, didn't he get off on a charter argument? Like, you were part of, as depressing as it is for you right now, like a lot of great people, it's a living document that's actually having an effect on the courts and how people are treated. So you should feel proud of that, Brian. Do you?
Well, I have in the last 6 months or a year become very depressed with the whole situation, and all the big things that have come before the various courts, both provincially and federally. We have lost just about all of them, and now with the latest onslaught by the federal government to the Justice Minister to try to change the notwithstanding clause, which obviously they have not the power. The courts and the federal government do not have the constitutional authority to do what they're trying to do. But they're repeating what Trudeau Sr. did back in 1981 when we were negotiating with him for the Charter and for all the other things that are in the Constitution Act of 1982, from minority language rights to the amending formula itself, to the rights of Indigenous peoples and so on, all of which is in that document. And the Prime Minister left the table and decided that he believed, and the federal government believed, that they could do this on their own. And so we went to court on that, and then at the end of the day, he started to feel nervous because suddenly in some of the courts where we were applying, he was nervous that he was going to lose. And so he was forced to make a reference to the Supreme Court of Canada himself. And so what the Supreme Court of Canada did, they folded all of the objections to it, including the federal government's own reference, into one court case and decided that this was unconstitutional. And here's the thing that anybody listening to me right now should understand, is that if you go into the internet and you go into the various sites that deal with the Constitution and that patriation period, many of them don't even mention that the federal government lost in court, that it was unconstitutional. That's why Trudeau came back to the table, and we finally did get the Charter and the Constitution Act of 82, because he knew he couldn't do unilaterally what he tried to do. He lost in court, and that's played down. And I just found a internet site the other day called constitutional.net, I think it is, and in there they say that they ignored the fact that this part was unconstitutional. And so what's happening now today is the federal government is doing the same thing as Trudeau tried to do in 1981. It's to unilaterally change something in the Constitution that affects the powers of the provinces. And the court has ruled you can't do that. So what the Supreme Court of Canada should do now, as a result of that reference by the federal government to mess around with the notwithstanding clause, whether you agree with it or not is another matter. The issue is, do they have the constitutional authority to change it now? And like Trudeau, this court now is a different court. It's still the Supreme Court of Canada, but it's different people on it. But they should be looking to that 1981 decision and telling the federal government quite clearly, we have no power over this. This is a matter for the amending formula. That was what all the patriation was about for the last 115 years. We didn't have the right to change our own constitution for 115 years, primarily because we tried 10 times over 115 years because we couldn't agree on an amending formula. Well, in 1981, we agreed on one, and we have one now in the Constitution. So it's incumbent upon the federal government to use the amending formula to change any of the provisions that are in the existing Charter or in the existing 1982 Act. And that's what they're not doing. So it's unbelievably depressing to me that all these years later, from 1982, that you have a federal government trying to do the very thing that they were defeated on trying to do in 1982.
Do you think Canadians are different than Americans in this regard, that we don't, Americans get emotional thinking about their rights and freedoms, and they pledge allegiance, and they think about those things. And Canadians, it's my sense anyway, that we're different. And one statistic from the research I was doing on the vaccine mandate thing that didn't happen today, 80% of the Canadian population as polled wanted those mandates. They wanted them. Like we seem like a nation that is very, very easily convinced to relinquish things.
And it goes back to very basic things. The Americans had a revolution. We did not.
Right.
When blood is spilled and lives are lost, as what happened in the American Revolution, which led to 1776 and their Constitution, that's a different situation altogether. What we did is we, as British colonies, Upper Canada, Lower Canada, Nova Scotia, and New Brunswick, agreed to create Canada through a negotiation situation. We never broke with the Crown. We went along and used a lot of the British systems and procedures that the Americans fought against, and therefore, starting from day one, there was a foundation in the United States, which was and a culture and a psychology which was different than Canada's, and that is playing itself out today.
What was it like for you watching the Queen sign that document, Brian?
Pardon?
What was it like for you? Did you watch the Queen? Was it the Queen that signed the document? Who signed the document on that day? 1982,
Yes,
April 17th.
I have copies of it here. Yeah, no, that was unbelievable, because I never thought I would be here talking to you today the way I'm talking, because it was clear to us, from the opening words of the charter, right? This country is founded on the principles of the supremacy of God and the rule of law. And I remember us talking about that and debating that. I remember these things very well. I've got a very good memory for the things that I was keenly involved in over the years, as anybody who knows me knows to be true. And so, signing that document and being a part of this, what we thought at the time was a major thing that we tried to get for 115 years and couldn't get it, and now finally had an amending formula and could do things ourselves in our own country. I was prepared when we started this process of patriation because of the Quebec referendum and all, and we needed to really do something big. I had a list, as did all the other premiers, now that we're going to be doing this constitutional thing, of what changes we wanted. And one of the changes I sought was to have more say over the fishery of Newfoundland. And I gave up on that for the sake of the country and for the sake of the amending formula and for the sake of all the other things. And many other premiers had just as important issues which they relinquished in the interest of the nation, and not in the interest of Newfoundland, but in the interest of the nation, and that we would revisit the things that we never got later for the sake of the country and getting an amending formula and getting a charter written down. So, all of us, all the premiers, all the first ministers at the time, and I think at the end of the day, even the two first ministers that stayed with the federal government, the province of Ontario, Mr. Premier William Davis and Mr. Premier Hatfield of New Brunswick, who stayed with the federal government, at the end of the day, when we signed this document, I think they were just as emotional and taken up with what we were doing as a major thing for the country as we were, who fought for it and had to fight Trudeau in the courts to make sure he came back to the table. So it was a pretty fundamental time, and we all understood very well. We all understood very well what we were up to and how important this was to be.
Mm-hmm. You're getting a lot of really lovely compliments here in the chat, Brian. Thank you for your service, Mr. Peckford, and I for one will never stop speaking out against tyranny. I worked in justice nearly 32 years in different capacities. I love my country, detest the leaders.
Yeah, it's extremely, it was so important at the time, right? The people that I had around me, and I've only recently disclosed this, that this was so important at the time. I had a number of people that were important in my life. My father and my high school teacher, who later became Dean of Education at Memorial University, and whom really changed my life when I was in high school, in the last year in high school. And I actually had privately set up to consult with him as we were going through this Constitution. It was so important, and to make sure that I bounced it off somebody who I inherently trusted to tell me what he thought. And that's how important it was. You consulted those people privately, beyond what your ministers were saying to you, beyond what your personal staff were saying to you, and so on. I made it. I had to consult with these people who I knew would tell me the truth as they see it. They wouldn't tell me what I thought I wanted to hear. They would tell me the truth. So I went to that length, and I'm sure the other first ministers went through similar kinds of lengths to ensure that what they were doing, that it was really important. And you got to look at people like Premier Lyon of Manitoba, who at the time was very skeptical of the federal government. And of course, he had told us early on that it was quite likely Trudeau would do something like this, or that the federal government would, that they weren't really serious when we were negotiating it early on and then left the table. And some of us had a lot of egg on our face because we had defended the federal government. We had defended the Prime Minister that he would never do this after agreeing to sit down with all of us to do this. And so that's why, it was very important that people forget. And I understand that why they forget. And I understand that they're not part of it like I am. But that's why the notwithstanding clause, whether people agree with it or not, was so important to all the provinces, because we didn't trust the federal government because of what had happened with them leaving the table, and that they would do it again. So we needed some protection that there may be things going on in a province. Newfoundland is different than BC, Ontario is different than Manitoba, and so on, where the province, as a legitimate government under the Federation, would like to do things which were going to be contrary to what was in the document for a period of time if you had the legislature on your side. And so this was an extremely important provision, but mainly driven by the skepticism of the provinces towards the federal government, and that was enhanced and heightened by the fact that the Prime Minister left the table. So they helped solidify all those provinces who were saying, well, perhaps we should forget about that and still go ahead and get this done. They helped to solidify all of these doubtful provinces of whether we should really push for the notwithstanding clause or not, because of the actions that the federal government took and now are taking again.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing is, ladies and gentlemen, the thing is, I have no particular axe to grind. I don't work for anybody, or I have no particular notion. Nobody's pushing me to say this or say that. I always was. My own. I was independent. I'm independent. I turned down. I won't get into it, but I turned down lots of offers that were made to me through the back door and the side door and this door and that door to do things differently, and I turned it all down, including millions of dollars, because I remembered my father and my mother. I remembered how I was raised, and that came back to me so strongly in those days. So that as I speak now, at 83 years old, I have no particular prejudice or any particular pressure put on me to say or do anything. I'm doing all this completely on my own as it relates to how I think, what my own experience, and my own set of values.
Mhm.
And it's important for people to understand that, because very often I get letters and emails and people contacting me and saying, you're doing this for that reason or some other reason. And I go back to them all. I'll get back to them all the time and explain to them who I am, where I came from, and what I stand for. And I have no particular axe to grind to enhance somebody else's position or whatever. It's done out of clear and clear conscience of what I think is right.
Mhm.
Brian, did Tamara or I or anyone ever make you aware of the situation in our trial in the last few years when your name came up in the courts and our Crown prosecutor didn't know who you were? I found it quite embarrassing for him at that time.
I heard that,
Yeah.
Yeah,
Even the judge was shocked.
Yes.
there's a problem, right? You just highlight another really important point, is that so many Canadians and even people who've gone to law school are not familiar with our Constitution and not familiar with the process that we went through for patriation in 81, 82. And that's extremely unfortunate. When I was in the midst of all of this, a lot of the provinces, independent MLAs and independent MPs asked me, and I did, do a Zoom with those people. Most of it was done online, of different collections of MLAs across the country. Sometimes in New Brunswick, sometimes in Ontario, sometimes it was MPs. Sometimes it was Alberta was very strong on that. And so I did a lot of these connections and these Zooms and these interactions with MLAs across the country. And they admitted to me, they were unaware of A, B, and C as related to the Constitution or to the patriation. They were completely unaware. And some of them were lawyers. And, so our educational system is really doing us a disservice. And that's why in my Magna Carta, when I did my speech in Victoria in 1922, in 2022, one of the first things I said we should reform is our educational system, so that there's a course called civics that's mandatory in all the public high schools of Canada, whereby civics must be taught as a subject, starting in grade 8 until the end of the high school program, grade 12 or grade 13 or whatever it happens to be. That's very, very important, because as we talked about earlier, as Trish mentioned, many people, we don't know our own country. We don't know our own. I introduced civics as a part of our curriculum when I taught school. Went to the principal and said, I want to put this in it and have this in the Friday afternoons. And of course, they thought at the time, because it was Friday afternoon, and I was just going to be developing it myself, and I get the parents and the students to agree that Friday afternoon nobody would be interested, because the bell is going to ring any time and we're off for the weekend. Well, lo and behold, I got approval to go ahead and do that just as a local one school thing, and the students were all delighted with it, and they when the bell rang and was ready to go, they still wanted me to finish what I was saying, or still have the discussion about the different layers of government in Canada, and we did some stuff on comparing it to the United States and what they were doing and so on. And so the students were turned on by it, and it made no difference if it was Friday or Monday or whatever. They were keenly interested in knowing more about their country. And I think if you did that today, the same thing would be true.
Well, you said earlier you were talking about the idea of people knowing where you stand. And I think people know where you stood. You went to Ottawa during the convoy. You gave a speech. You were standing with Canadians, weren't you?
Yes. And the other thing, we've got to be really understand is that in order to do the reform that's now necessary, the first thing must be that we believe in a God, that we believe in integrity. And right now, you see, in our country, in our main, and in the federal parliament, an MP can break the law and still serve as an MP in their parliament. We can't have that if we're going to have an honest government and to make honest changes to our constitution. People who break the law should not be able to serve. And I've written all of the leaders in Canada about this, and none of them has ever answered me. It's a simple matter. We don't have to change the Constitution. All we have to do is change the Conflict of Interest Act, and it can be done in a day or 2 days. Introduce an amendment to the Conflict of Interest Act which says if a member of this Parliament of Canada, right, breaks the law as determined by an independent Conflict of Interest Commissioner and or a court of the country, of judges in the country, then that MP can no longer serve in the Parliament of Canada, and nobody will bring that in. Nobody will introduce that. So number one, that's what we got to get back to. We got to get back to some honesty and integrity in our system, because as long as you can do that, and as long as political parties don't have to show their eye out of the financial statements on the internet as part of their website, then and it's so hard to go into the Elections Canada and try to get all of this access to information, some of which is out of date. So there's an obligation to me, just out of general common law, that if there's a political party in Canada, one of the first things they must do is produce their financial reports annually, and to make it and expose it at their convention and on their internet sites, so that everybody knows where the money came from and where the money went, and do it in detail, so we know, and who's getting paid. For example, today, who's getting paid in the Liberal Party apparatus in their headquarters? Who's getting paid? Well, who's getting the contracts for the Liberal Party to do their polling? Who's getting the contract? How much are they? Was it a open competition for who got it, or was it some of their own people that are now getting money from those parties? So this is the kinds of stuff that we got to do in order to establish some credibility again, so people won't be skeptical of every politician that they hear of.
Yeah. Well, I think we also, for that to work, Brian, we need a neutral, objective news media so that we can judge the people who are running, and that we don't have that right now because they hide stuff on behalf of the politicians they like, right?
I agree. Couldn't agree more. You know, there is another, the third estate, or fourth, whatever you want to call it. The media are very critical components and major players in the development of a democracy.
Yeah.
And right now, we don't have an independent media which can carry out these public functions, which are so important if we are to reform our system.
Yeah.
I have a lovely comment here. Thank you, Mr. Peckford. That's exactly what Canada needs. We need to demand integrity of our governments and our media. Another comment here. So much respect for Mr. Peckford for fighting all of these years. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, and just to end off, I am by nature an optimist. That's why I got involved in politics in the beginning. That's why I went teaching in the beginning. I'm an optimist. My whole family are optimists. But what has happened in my lifetime up until now, that's why I'm sorry, and I regret having to be so negative on this thing. But in order for us to get change, I think we're going to have to come to grips with who we are and what we are doing now, and admit that there's a lot of things going wrong. And if we admit reality, if we admit that, then we have an opportunity to change it. But until we admit it, including the media, including the judiciary, and including the legislative, the parliament, right, and including the executive, until all the components of this society start to recognize the reality of the situation, legitimate change cannot occur.
Well said. Yep, well said. I mean, it's the first step in any 12-step program, right? You have to first admit that there's a problem. And I think that's, we need some other Canadians to wake up and finally admit that, hey, man, there's a problem here.
Yes.
So,
And I mean, it manifests itself in what happened to you, Tamara, and Chris, and the other people who are leaders in trying to bring some sense to the situation where people were losing their work and losing their jobs and having their rights trampled on. So, you manifest and personalize the very thing that we're talking about here. Mm-hmm. And I want to thank you very much for having me, and I really appreciate it participating in this. And I hope you'll continue it, because I think it's extremely important force that you're now unleashing.
Well, thank you. And of course, thank you so much for coming on. I'm sorry we didn't have the Zoom set up and we went this way instead, but I think this works out okay. This is what we do here with the Freedom Convoy people. We just find a way to make it work, and that's what we did. So
and anybody wants to follow me, they can just go in on my website or my WordPress, www.Peckford, Peckford, the number 4, the number 2, the year I was born, Peckford42.wordpress.com, and they can follow me on all the different things I say, including the stuff I say on the Constitution.
Fantastic. You have a great blog. I think you try to get that out, once a week or once every 2 weeks now, Brian?
Pardon?
You try to get your blog out once a week?
No, every day. I do 2 and 3 things on it every day.
Oh, wow. I don't get that many.
11,000.
Wow. Well, there you go.
On my blog, 11,000.
To give Mr. Peckford a follow, that was Peckford42 at WordPress.
Peckford42, www.Peckford4242, that's 2 numbers.
Right.
WordPress.com.
Okay, perfect. Okay, well, thank you so much. We've taken up more than enough of your time. So we will let you go. You guys have a safe trip. I know you got a busy couple of weeks coming up, and we'll have you on again real soon, I hope.
Okay, thank you very much for having me, and every great wish.
Thanks, Brian.
Right back at you.
Bye.
Thanks, guys.
Okay,
Bye.
I'm hopping off, and I don't know how to.
I will kick you out.
Oh, you can out. Okay, because there's a red square there too. I don't know if you hit that, or I didn't want to hit the wrong
I think
button.
you can, yeah, but I can put you back in there.
Just kick me out. Okay, guys.
Thank you so much, Trish. Have a great
Thanks,
night.
Trish.
Isn't he the greatest thing going? Wow, he's just so adorable and smart.
He
and
is.
everything. Just great.
This is what I mean. He should be going to all the universities, all the high schools, the elementary schools, doing town halls, and we're just not utilizing this absolutely incredible resource.
I know, it's ridiculous. Anyway.
So,
Bye,
okay,
guys.
thank you. Bye, Trish.
Bye, Trish.
Wow. Thanks for putting that up there, Judith. Yes, www.peckford42@wordpress.com. That is absolutely right. And
He's an amazing man.
He is an amazing man. We've been so lucky to get to know him and become friends with him and his lovely wife, Carol. Like I said at the beginning here, it was really ironic that my first meeting with Mr. Peckford was actually when we were on our way to the Lord Elgin, myself, Dwayne. I can't remember if you were there. No, you weren't there, Chris.
Nope.
And Keith Wilson and possibly Eva, on our way to sit down and tell this man that the Emergencies Act had just been invoked. Like, what a ironic and iconic moment throughout the whole thing. Hey,
I think I have the photo. I think I can put it up on the screen.
Oh, sure.
If you want to give it a try.
That would be great.
I'll try not to screw it up.
We're just learning as we go here, and we actually thought it would just make it just. We're just.
No,
here, guys.
I can't seem to put it up. But it's a photo of. I'm way in the back. It's Keith and Eva, Tamara, Dwayne, Carol, and Brian in that meeting. I thought I'd be able to show it, but for some reason, even I can't figure out, and I'm a techie.
We'll play around with this.
We'll get better at this. Yeah.
Yeah, we will. Every day we'll get better and better. I just said it. Well, and I mean, the thing too, after we did that press conference with Brian at the Sheridan. I think you guys remember the one where Glenn McGregor was all being a jerk. Glenn McGregor was just doing Glenn McGregor things. Anyways, and I totally lost my train of thought now.
He was aggressive that day.
It was after that we all got to go up. There you go. Yeah, there we are.
Yeah. So that's real.
We all went up to a room after and ordered pizza, and I just felt I was almost crying the whole time, because here's former Premier Peckford sitting around with all of us, just ragtag hooligans basically, and telling us the stories, like telling us personal stories about all the members of Parliament during that time, and just funny stories personal stories about each and every one of them. And I just was so struck by, like, what a special, it's gonna make me cry now, just what a special moment that was. I think for all of us that were in that room. And you could have heard a pin drop. If Mr. Peckford was talking, nobody was talking.
We were out moving trucks that night. That was on February 13th, wasn't it? It was in the evening. It was on the 14th. That was our first day of moving trucks out of the residential areas where we could do what we could. And the phone rang, and I think I was 7 or 8 blocks away, and they said, Mr. Peckford would like to meet you. And I ran, and it was cold. But when he speaks to a group of people, or just even yourself, you feel you're in the presence of greatness. He speaks with such a powerful voice and wisdom.
I do remember that meeting, and I've actually spoken about this many times publicly. Is that that time when in the photo that I just showed, we were all sitting around having coffee, and people were coming in and out. And I think Tamara, you and Dwayne you were having a coffee with him first, and I had asked Keith if I could have a conversation with Brian about some other stuff that we were looking to do. And I was a little bit even embarrassed to ask. I'm like, I kind of felt like, is this going to be viewed like I'm on an ego trip that I'm requesting a meeting with Brian Peckford? But there was very good reasons why I wanted to meet him. But I walked in the room, you and Dwayne were there, Carol was there, and there was people leaving. And this is on the 14th of February. And I remember, Brian is talking to us about, the creation of the charter. So you're there getting a personal history lesson from the only person alive that participated in that, in the signing of it, but the key figure, one of the key figures, the only one who's still alive. You're getting a personal history lesson over coffee about your charter and rights and freedoms. And Keith Wilson walked in and informed us all, including Brian, that our rights and freedoms had just been taken away. Yeah. Like, talk about an ironic time, but I don't want to meet the guy who created and participated in giving us all the charter at the moment we're losing the charter.
Right.
But that's exactly what happened. And the earlier comment, for what? Bunch of people protesting.
Yeah,
they never met the standard, and that could be a whole new episode. But the point is, I mean, what a time to meet Brian Peckford. And I had only known about him. I knew about him because a month before he had appeared on Jordan Peterson, and so I knew who he was when I got there, and when I heard that he was in town, and I was like, oh, it'd be neat to be in a room and see if he speaks at the back. I didn't think I'd get a chance to meet him. Anyway, very surreal times for sure.
Yes, it was. Any comments, Danny?
Well, I was following Brian Peckford really closely, leading up to mandates being announced, and especially after they were announced, and trying to figure out what we were all going to do. Because I don't ever remember learning what the Charter of Rights and Freedoms were as a kid in school. I didn't learn about the Charter, or that I remember. I don't ever remember hearing about the Charter of Rights and Freedoms until I went to cop school in Regina at the RCMP Academy at Depot. And back then, they beat that into us over and over and over again. Like, everything we did had to be in consideration of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. The big ones for cops being security of the person, security against unreasonable search and seizure, etc. But that was like the foundation of like what they called applied police sciences. So when you go to the training academy, you have your fitness, you have your police defensive tactics, you have your firearms training, your driver's training, but the bulk of your time is spent in classroom, like learning the theory, and then you apply that to like scenarios, like when they're trying to slowly expose you to like simulated situations that you might encounter as a cop on the street. But it's all about the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. That was every decision you made was supposed to be based on like considering that. I mean, there's definitely some times where you take away someone's freedom by putting them under arrest, but it all has to be articulatable. You have to be able to articulate that based on reasonable probable grounds and offenses committed, etc. And if you don't do a very thorough job in documenting why you did what you did and being able to include that in your report and testify to that in court, the big thing that defense attorneys always use is the Charter of Rights. And I mean, you guys know that more than anybody now. But so when I saw what was happening during COVID, like it took me so long to understand, like, how is this happening? Like, everything that they're doing is a massive violation of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And yet you didn't hear anyone hardly talking about it at all, except for someone like Brian Peckford, right? Like, we were having these conversations with our union, and they were basically telling us, like, well, tough luck. We lobbied for you guys to get early access to these vaccines as first responders, so tough luck. Take it up with that. And, the RCMP leadership wasn't saying anything on our behalf. I hardly heard any lawyers say anything. And it took me so long to finally understand that, like, the Charter of Rights and Freedoms is only sufficient to protect us if people are willing to defend it.
Right. Yes.
And it's really difficult to do that if you've never learned about it. And the institutions who are supposed to be learned or like educated on it and responsible for protecting, like enforcing it, basically, if they all turn against it, well, then where do you turn? And like Trish said earlier about, like, the courts, we couldn't go to the courts for assistance. We couldn't go to the police for assistance. We couldn't go to our MPs for assistance, because most of my experience was you wouldn't even get a response, even if you did write them, provincial or federal. And the only thing that there was left to do was either leave or join the convoy. And so
Right.
I was going to leave until the convoy came. And I was like, okay, well, maybe here's our chance to pump the brakes on this freight train of insanity. And so, and then, I mean, obviously things didn't go entirely as we had hoped with the convoy, the way it was taken down. Especially, I really, really, really wanted to see the police stand up and say, okay, like, this is too far. Like, we've gone along with all of this for too long, but like, what you're about to ask of us is too much. And so, I went from being a believer in the system, it's always had its flaws, to now, like, my baseline expectation is like, well, the charter only protects us if the institutions are willing to defend it.
Mhm.
And then I hear a lot of people talk about, well, you should use the Bill of Rights. And I'm like, well, I can tell you right now, as a cop, that's not even a consideration for cops or courts.
Mhm.
Like, if you try and make an argument solely based on the Bill of Rights that predated the charter, like, that's a go nowhere strategy. And if you're trying to combat the current system as it exists today. but then, people say, oh, we need something more like the American Constitution. And I was like, okay, I understand what they mean by that. But the American Constitution was trampled on just as much as the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, depending totally on where you lived.
Right.
If you lived in New York or California, you were screwed. The Constitution didn't mean anything there either. But if you were in Florida, Idaho, Texas, well, then you might have, you might have had a better chance.
Mhm.
And so, like, ultimately, they're important documents, but what makes them really have strength is when people are willing to defend them.
Mhm.
And so, I mean, I don't think I'm saying anything that people don't already know, but like, we can't count on our institutions to defend us anymore. They
No.
won't.
They won't.
The majority of them won't. They'll do what they feel is safe for their career.
Right.
Right? They'll go as far as they feel safe for their career, but very few will actually stick their neck out all the way and
Leave it
at
for
risk
people
of
like us.
having their comfort taken away.
Yeah.
And I mean,
Yeah.
I don't have a solution to this.
No.
I really don't.
I got a message a
Our-
couple of weeks ago from a lady from Ontario who's a criminal defense lawyer, and she was a Crown prosecutor for a long time. And she sent me a lovely message, but very long. And the gist of it was that every single lawyer, she told me, every single one, Crown prosecutors, criminal defense attorneys, civil attorneys, constitutional lawyers, in her message, she said every single lawyer in Canada that she had spoken to thought that what was happening to Chris and myself and Pat and Chaba and all this stuff was completely off the record, totally wrong. None of them had ever seen anything like it before. And while, I appreciate that and the silent support, my first thought was, well, then if every single lawyer that does feel this way actually stood up and said something, then the problem would be solved.
Like a Great Barrington Declaration of Lawyers type of thing.
So many professionals, and they'll always say, I support you, but I want to help you this way, but. And I say, if there was no buts, Canada would have no problem. There would be no problem here. So, I mean, we all need to take a long look in the mirror and figure out, what are you willing to give up? Because I'll tell you what we were willing to give up. We have to keep fighting in a respectful manner. We need to educate ourselves, and like you were saying, Danny, and follow Brian Peckford. Listen to what this man has to say. He's a wealth of knowledge, and we're so lucky to still have him. So,
and the system is silencing them. Go ahead, Tom.
Tamara,
It's okay.
sorry.
Go ahead, Danny. Go ahead.
I mean, like, every cop that is aware of what happened to you guys, every cop knows that that's not even close to what would normally be expected from the system. Everybody knows.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody knows that it's a completely brings what they call the administration of justice into disrepute, right? Everybody knows that people don't go to jail for years for mischief, especially the kind where nothing is actually destroyed.
Right.
Everybody knows that people don't get remanded and held in custody over mischief. Mm-hmm. Everybody knows that, well, first of all, people don't even really get charged for the type of mischief that you guys were charged for. And everybody knows that cops definitely don't fly all the way across Canada to arrest someone for a Canada-wide warrant on a breach that didn't occur. Right. Everybody knows that this is 100% political. And yet I kind of get the same thing as you do, Tamara. If cops acknowledge me in public, if they know who I am, it's usually because they were a supporter of what I said, what I did. But most of the time, it's like they're silently supportive. And I'm like, okay, I get that you might not want to be public, and that's fine. But what are you doing at the office? What are you saying to people that you're working with? And I know that there are some that are a little bit vocal, But it's like, this could all crumble right now. All of this overreach could crumble right now if the enforcers, like the cops, like the police, like the court, the crown prosecutors, if they just said, this is ridiculous. We're not doing this. We have real problems to deal with. Go away with this nonsense.
And at the beginning or during the pandemic too, I mean, like I don't know about you guys, but I mean, my thoughts were, and I think I said this on a live right when we got up to the hill, Chris, on the 29th. You know, I thought the police were going to do something or say something, and that didn't happen. And then I thought, well, for sure, the doctors are going to say something, and this is going to stop. But they just ended up getting fired, smeared, and canceled. And then I thought the lawyers were going to actually get up and do something. None of the institutions that I was taught in school growing up that I could trust and that were there to protect me were protecting me.
No.
And I couldn't figure out why. And it was up to the truckers that actually finally came together and said, this was enough. Enough is enough. And I mean, and then here we are, you know, and we were basically coming in as support. I mean, myself, Danny, and Tom. And I remember the first time I talked to Danny on the phone, I got off the phone and I was jumping around like, I just talked to Danny Beaufort. You know, I've been following you.
I had the same
organization, and I was just like, oh my gosh, I just talked to Danny Beaufort.
Well, I met Danny and Brian Dennison at the same time at the Arc. I met them together, and I was like, wow, this is pretty cool for me.
Yeah.
So, but I wanted to say something, you know, a couple of things that I want to touch on what Danny was saying. The average citizens in Canada, at least up until COVID, so I want to say, and thankfully, that more citizens know about the Charter of Rights and Freedoms than ever before since it was probably first created. But the Charter of Rights and Freedoms is the mechanism that we have in law that has one sole purpose, and that is to protect the Canadian citizens from the government or an agent of the government. That is its sole purpose. And I've had a couple of conversations with Brian about this. Like, Tamara, you and I had the call with him and Carol the other night. And I've talked to Brian on the phone because when I ran in 2022 in the Ontario election, I called two people to ask their advice on whether I should do it. One was Brian. The other one was Randy Hillier. And both of them said, yes, go and do it.
Yeah.
But I've talked to Brian many times, and I've said, like, there's a certain group in Canada that they're desperate for some sort of better mechanism to protect us. And the Bill of Rights always comes up. And the first thing Brian will tell you, the Bill of Rights doesn't go far enough. The Bill of Rights is only federal. And here's another thing that Brian has told me. When the Charter of Rights was signed into law, every piece of legislation in Canada had to be reviewed and be brought into compliance with the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Okay. So, you know, ultimately what it means is every single police officer in Canada, once the Charter of Rights was brought into law, basically had to be retrained and to make sure that all of what they were doing with the public complied with this brand new piece of legislation, this new charter. So, you know, people can't just go and sue Tim Hortons for a charter violation. They're not an agent of the government. That's a different thing altogether. So the whole reason it exists is just to protect us, the ordinary citizen, from the government. But more to Danny's point, it's like, if it is the teeth, but if nobody's willing to use its jaws to bite down on something, then it's useless. So imagine trying, you know, you've got a judge who his whole career is based on the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. You know, 40 years later, that's all he's ever done is the charter. If the judge today, in this day and age, doesn't even give a crap about the charter, what chances do you think you have walking into a courtroom and yelling at a judge wearing your concert shirt and your bandana and telling the judge that, you know, don't call me sir, I don't respect, you know, I'm here for the Bill of Rights. It's like they don't even understand, or they don't even respect their own holy grail of law. Why do you think that you're going to go in and convince a judge otherwise? You're in the courtroom because you probably had your charter rights, I shouldn't say probably, but possibly had your charter rights violated. That's the argument you need to have, unfortunately. It's not a good thing. And we're in a situation now where we have the inverse of institutional protection. They're ignoring, and they just threw the charter out. All those people, I agree with all of you when you come to speaking your voice, being bold, and telling truth to power. It's like the Stanley Milgard or Milgram experiment, right? It's the guy in the lab coat in the corner office in the police force, or your church, or your university, or your doctor's office. The people in authority, they call the shots, and guess what? You just comply. You just follow orders.
Yeah.
And that's where people sacrifice you for the greater good of the company, because they don't see the line between what I do today and what's going to be done to my family by my fellow officers sometime in the future. And that's where people like, Danny and Helen Gruss, there were so many of that time that did stand up, and they got their legs cut out from underneath them. But I think, Danny and I talked about this, I think, at his house once, that it was like whack-a-mole. The first to stick your head up, you're getting it taken off. And I think Danny and others like him knew that they were going to get their heads taken off within their organizations, but still did it anyway. Right? They still did it anyway, because they could see very clearly the line of silence to basically being locked up in a cage by our own government if people like Danny didn't stand up.
Yeah.
and the others. So, and then you and all the others, and I joined later. Yeah, and I it's sad because I worked at a college, right? And this is interesting because I referenced a document that was put together by some retired police officers about the Criminal Code of Canada and what my college was doing, what laws were being violated. I referenced those in the email that I sent, which got me fired. So I'm referencing the law, and I got fired for it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where we are.
It is.
Anyway, I just wanted to add that because, I think Danny's story is unique and important to this when, in conjunction with hearing from Brian Peckford, because Brian created the conditions to protect us from the government. It was up to Danny to actually be the teeth and implement that.
Yeah.
And so I can imagine Danny's betrayal.
Well, and I think the convoy as a whole would have had a completely different outcome, honestly, without Danny there helping us and guiding us. I mean, the rumors that were constantly flying around every day. Like, I remember, Danny, you must have been pulling your hair out, or maybe you did already. But, we'd go to Danny, and this is coming, and this is coming. And he had to just go through and sift through all these things to find out, what was credible and what wasn't credible, because, well, a lot of people there were obviously afraid of what was happening, or afraid of what could be done against us. And so, just having Danny on the ground with us was just, an honor, really.
It was an honor. I'll second that.
Those are very kind words from all of you. But just don't forget, I owe a lifetime of loyalty to all of you for coming all the way to Ottawa to protect me and my family when everybody that I thought I could count on wasn't there. Mm-hmm. And some even made me feel like I was the enemy. But I'll say what just to comment a bit further on what you just said, Tamara, it was super chaotic at times, but people just came out of the woodwork to come find me. Guys, people who had left CSIS, people who had left military, people who had left CSEC, basically our version of the NSA. People just ended up showing up at the Swiss Hotel, and they're just like, hey, how can I help you? I just quit my job because of the same thing. What can I do? And so I actually had I joked around, I was constantly walking around, if I had a phone in my hand, or I had a set of earplugs or earphones wired in so that I could walk and talk at the same time. And anytime all of those things were coming, you're getting bombarded with messages, social media messages or emails or phone calls saying oh, we hear this is going to happen. This is going to happen. And so I actually had an incredible team of volunteer people who would go check things out on the ground for when I couldn't go, rarely could I ever go check it out myself. And so I always had people who were willing to go check it out that had like a level of training in like the law enforcement, military intelligence community. And so I remember laughing. I was like, I feel like I'm running my own little mini intelligence agency here, trying to figure out like what's real, what's not, in the midst of like this, 3 weeks of chaos. But
Yes.
it was the most meaningful thing I ever did in that period of my life. As far as like, nothing I did as a police officer really ever compared to how important trying to do the best I could for the convoy was. Do you know what I mean? Because all the stuff, rarely as a police officer did I ever feel like my family was at risk, whereas I totally believed that if something didn't happen like the convoy, that my family could be at risk.
Right.
And I've said that out loud, and some people many times, and some people get real upset, or some people get real uncomfortable and act like, oh, that could never happen in Canada. I'm like, bullshit. It could 100% happen in Canada. Like it has happened in Canada before when people have been rounded up and put in concentration camps, right?
Yep.
And like it was happening in Australia, people were forcibly quarantined. It was happening in China, and we basically adopted China's lockdown model, which, funny enough, I worked with a guy last winter who was living in China when COVID happened, and he stayed in China an extra year to avoid having to take a COVID shot.
Wow.
China never used mRNA, neither did Russia, and they never mandated it for their people, not even for foreigners who were living there. He was living there. He was working overseas at the time.
Wow.
I remember.
Stayed in China an extra year to avoid having to take the shot, to avoid having to come back to Canada and take the shot to do the airplane thing.
Yeah. Wow.
The catalyst. I was asked this question today by somebody and just asked for the lead up too. And I remember those dark days through COVID, crossing the border into North Dakota, driving the truck. And it was a different way of life down there. You could enter a restaurant. You didn't have to show a card. Coming back to your own country, you had to have the Arrive Scan app on your phone. There were so many things that the government just kept implementing. And it was a different world in North Dakota and the States, wherever I traveled compared to Canada. And I thought, why?
Yeah.
For me, I was pretty nervous when I was seeing, I think, New Brunswick putting armed security at grocery stores.
Yeah.
And that was just prior to the convoy happening. So I was like, okay, it's getting real. I hope my preparations thus far have been, good enough.
It was insanity.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we are coming up to 7:45 already here in Alberta. I think, gentlemen, we have some mean tweets we wanted to read off. We thought we'd save a little section here to read some mean tweets. I've got some of them posted here that I'll put up on the screen. But sometimes when we get talking about this topic, like we can all get a little bit dark and down. So it's not always fun and games, although we do try to maintain our humor. And so I'll just go first. And then Chris, if you want to read one. Tom, I've got two of yours ready to roll. I'll just bring them up on the screen.
Okay.
And same thing. So we'll just go, how about me, Chris, Tom, and then Danny.
Okay.
So the first one I found, it was too long for me to put on here. So I'm just going to read it to you. So this is from our beautiful former environment minister, Catherine McKenna. So you can just imagine where this is going. This was from January 31st, 2022, from her X account. And she says, conservative politicians egging on the convoy have a lot to answer for. None more than Pierre Poilievre, who represents the Ottawa region. Instead of standing with Ottawans, he stood with folks with swastikas and Confederate flags who beat up homeless, denigrated memorials, and closed businesses. Was that you beating up the homeless, Barber?
I don't remember it that way, but my mindset's a little different than Catherine McKenna. So I
beating up the homeless? What? Oh, okay, what do you got, Chris?
Well, I've got an email that came in here a little while ago. I don't know. I really had to look really hard to find any hate on all my social medias. It was a real struggle for me, of course, but I'll keep it nice and light for the day here. Christopher John Barber, simple. Drive a truck, pay your bills. Be thankful you don't live in many of the countries that I've defended your rights in. Simple. Shut the F up and drive a truck. Of course, I edited that one. I do drive a truck and I fix trucks and I do a lot in the day. So these people make me laugh.
Okay, Tom, I really like this one. I am going to put this one up here for you to read.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Oh yeah. You're a pathetic low-tier thinker. You're slightly more intelligent than your borderline retarded audience that gives you the false belief you have opinions worth expressing. You don't.
I mean, keep in mind we have to kind of go with the mild ones here too, because we.
Oh yeah.
There might be some impressionable young people watching. Danny, what did you find for us?
It's too bad you got so famous, given you completely lack skills, knowledge, talents, or abilities, and are an incorrigibly stupid. See you next Tuesday.
Oh my gosh. Oh, wow.
I didn't know I got so famous.
Yeah, just so famous. No kidding. That's hilarious, Danny. Oh, I got this one here. So yesterday I posted a little picture of myself with my newest little inmate. Actually, he's my 3-year-old grandson. Anyways, it was the cutest picture ever. So here's the comment that I got from one lovely lady by the name of Carol_Lorraine on X. Lucky you're not in jail where you should be. I feel sorry for that little boy who you'll turn into a negative anti-government little fascist.
I pray that that person doesn't have children.
Tell me how you really feel, Carol.
And
Yes, you
if
can.
Carol is watching, is Carol not aware that being anti-government is actually anti-fascist? Because being a fascist means you're pro-authoritarian centralized government.
Make it
Or
make
did I say
sense.
that right?
They don't
Yeah,
because
I
they
mean,
if you're-
told them to hate.
If you're pro-fascist, you want the government to rule over every part of your life. So if you're anti-government, doesn't that make you by default anti-fascist? But I know that it's not about making sense. It's
That's
just
right.
about insulting people.
Yeah, sometimes logic and common sense escape these people. Okay, Chris, go ahead. What do you got?
Oh, I got a short one for you here. Message from Ryan. Loser, who will hire you? Most days I have more work than I can possibly shake a stick at. And I'm very thankful for that, by the way. There's a lot of support out here in the business community, especially in farmers and in the prairies here. It's steady. So thank you very much for that. And Ryan, thank you for taking the time.
He seems nice.
Yeah, well,
Okay,
we went to your fundraiser last year, Chris, and there was over 650 people in the room. So I'm pretty sure you got a lot of good community support.
Oh, you
Yeah.
do.
He really does. Yeah. All right, Tom, you're up. There we go.
Okay, I don't know who Tom is, but is there a controlled opposition lens to look through this? There was some more to that, but it's like, oh, I'm leaving it alone.
Put the rest of it on there.
Yeah, but you know, it always comes up about me and Danny being what's the list up to, Danny? Because I think you and I have served in every single intelligence organization known to man,
Yes.
probably
I
including
wish I
the
was that
Vatican.
interesting.
I know. CIA, FBI, CSIS, CSAC, Mossad. Who am I missing? MI6, OPP, OPS, RCMP. Like these are all the ones that I get accused of. And then with Danny, it's like I've been out of the game 10 years, and I was just an army guy. I wasn't special.
And that was always kind of the inside joke because I mean, Tom came on the scene a couple days after the rest of us. And I swear, and I think we talked about this a little bit last week too, but everyone thought Tom was a plant. Everyone is like, where did this guy come from? He's an army captain. And even long after the convoy, I mean, even to this day, people will come up and like, what do you think of that Tamara? I think he's a Fed, or, you know, I mean, it's just hilarious.
Why didn't he get arrested? Why didn't me and Danny get arrested? It's like,
yeah, that's right.
Why did anybody get arrested? I still don't
Right.
even. I can't make sense of even the charges that were in place. So,
But at least you didn't run, Tom, and that is the main thing. Unlike a few
Right.
other people that we associate with.
yeah. You know, I was the last one out of the arc. I actually helped move the photocopier out with the guy,
Right.
and I cleaned out the conference room, everything.
Yeah.
And you're right, Chris. That's for another episode. There are some
Yes.
people that ran. They ran, and they got them on the phone. It's like, where are you? I'm halfway across the country.
Yeah.
They
That's
just
great.
invoked it 5 minutes ago. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Did you fly to Florida lately, or
Yeah.
another episode? We'll just leave that.
That's right.
Yeah.
Tune in,
Okay,
folks.
Danny, what do you got?
Sorry, I just saw a comment which I love. Lynn Bolton, Danny's operational name is Leprechaun, and I think that's perfect. So shout out to her for that. But I'll keep it real short and sweet. This one, there seems to be a pattern of this, and it seems to show up more than once. I don't. Maybe it's more than one account, or someone using more than one account. He is an ass. A retarded ass. And it just shows up over and over and over again.
Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. All right. Well, I'm going to do one here by Jagmeet Singh. I can't get it posted, obviously, but this was one of the first tweets that I saw that came out from our glorious former leader of the NDP party, not Jagmeet Singh, former leader of the NDP, on February 8th of 2022 tweeted, "These so-called leaders of the Freedom Convoy are not protesting mandates. They're promoting conspiracy theories, spreading hate, and trying to overthrow a democratically elected government. This is not leadership. This is dangerous." Trying to overthrow the government?
How did that work out for you there, Jagmeet? I think you're unemployed right
now. I mean, this is the thing that kills me is that these politicians or former politicians can just tweet out whatever they want. I mean, that's some pretty serious allegations in there. Same with Catherine McKenna. Yeah, she's got a couple on here. Anyways, yeah, in the second one she's got here, she says, "This isn't a protest." This was on the 11th. "This isn't a protest. It's a 15-day occupation of downtown Ottawa, Canada's capital, with harassment and assaults, terrorizing of residents, businesses to close, goal of overthrowing the government with foreign funding and alt-right and criminal elements." So, I mean, Chris Barber and I have now been convicted of mischief and sentenced and are being held to account for our actions. And so when did these people get held to account?
Mm-hmm.
Like, all I said was hold the line and love each other, right? And like, so she can go on, these guys can go on to their social media accounts and spread that kind of stuff. It's just nonsense.
Can somebody go back and find at that time Mayor Nenchi's, now running for NDP in Alberta? His divisive rhetoric was absolutely vile. For an elected leader, does he say some of the things? He basically said we shouldn't eat, we are plague rats, and called us all white supremacists. So there's something about that man's speech. Just I can't stand even looking at him.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Well, did you have another one, Chris?
Just a short one here. Another one. Sure. This guy's actually went out and created the email for Chris Barber is a British cigarette, let's just say. I don't know why. This guy is multiple in my comment section, and I've ingrained his marbles. But I can't wait to see how many of you anti-vax retards get sick from the measles.
Oh, no. I have my measles shot. I'm not anti-vax. My mom got me. I have all my childhood vaccinations.
Used to get my get my flu shot every fall up until COVID, and we've seen the amount of stuff, and now I don't. So now I can be an anti-vax.
I wouldn't even get a tetanus shot now if I stood on a rusty nail, if I'm being honest.
So I went looking for the mean tweets was one thing, but then I came across the screenshot I took that, like the rest of you, I'm sure, I got blocked by Jan Arden.
Oh, nice.
So that's my badge of honor. Like, wow, you took the time to block me.
What
Oh
can
my
I do
God.
to have the
How
same?
will I live with myself? Yeah.
Wow. She's nasty.
Yeah.
She is nasty. And
Yeah.
you had another block, somebody that blocked you on there. Who else was that?
Yeah,
Tom?
I was a little so
That one would hurt more.
General Randy Hillier
Oh,
blocked me
yes.
because I wasn't disrespectful. I'd never be
No, you are
disrespectful
never.
to Randy Hillier, of all things. But he, Doug Ford was trying to rope him in to roll out the vaccines for Ontario. And so something happened. I remember I didn't call him out. I was like, well, what's your thought on this? Like, come on. I wanted to hear what he had to say about it. And I just got a block. Oh, well, I'll live with the disappointment.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Still.
But hey, at the end of the day, like, if you're not that good at social media, and I don't blame him for blocking me, because I block people. I've turned it into a real art. I block a lot of people just because I do. And I've got my own reasons for it. But I block a lot of people, which is why I had to go to the Wayback Machine and find some mean tweets. But I think I'm going to start collecting them just for the show.
Absolutely.
fun.
We'll end our segment, or we'll end our show with this segment going forward.
What are we doing? What's next week?
Well, I think what I had in mind for next week was maybe just a roundtable discussion. We'll come on and just give our origin stories. What motivated Chris to start? How I got involved when Danny came on board. When the Fed came in there about 3 days later. I mean, Tom, the plant. And just tell our origin stories, and we'll just have a fun conversation and how we met, why we were there. And we'll just keep the discussion going. I think what I'd like to do with the show is to have the majority of the episodes be discussions with us or whoever else we want to invite on. And maybe the third, like tonight, the third Thursday of every month, we'll have our guest host and a special guest. I've talked to Ray McGinnis and Gordon McGill both. I would really love to do a full, at least one episode on the Coots cases. We've got the Coots 4 and the Coots 3. Both of them have been really following those very closely, and I think they'd be a wealth of information to talk about that stuff. So I've got some nice little pairs I'm working on for guest hosts and guests. So anyways, we should probably leave it there. It's been 2 hours. I can't believe it.
I have to do this. I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. But I'm taking a page out of Roger Stone's lessons. I'm going to plug the book. And I'll tell you why I'm plugging the book. Because Bill C2, 8, 9, and whatever else they come up with, if all else fails, I wrote a book.
Yeah,
hold it up there again, Tom. It went a little blurry when you put it up there.
Sorry. It's sorry. It's just the way the thing. Yeah, it looks like this. It's only available on Amazon. Please, and I'm not. I wrote this book. My intent was to help and save as many people as humanly possible.
Yes.
So have a look.
Good.
Yeah.
Well, we'll look forward to next week. Leave us some comments on who you want to have in one of the shows. I was kind of thinking we could have people that were involved with us in Ottawa that haven't had their stories told, and that is something we could do more going forward.
So many. There's so many.
Sure.
So thanks a lot, everyone, for showing up. My apologies for the technical difficulties with Mr. Peckford, but I think it worked out okay. Like I said, I am not a computer techie person by any means, but I will slowly get this figured out. Thank you for everything. Have a great night, and we'll see you all next week.
See you guys.
Take care.
See ya. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.